Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius, commonly called Boethius, was a Roman senator, consul, magister officiorum, and philosopher of the early 6th century. He was born 4 years after Odoacer deposed the last Roman emperor and declared himself king of Italy, and entered public service under Ostrogothic King Theodoric the Great, who later imprisoned and executed him in 524 on charges of conspiracy to overthrow him. While jailed, Boethius composed his Consolation of Philosophy, a philosophical treatise on fortune, death, and other issues, which became one of the most popular and influential works of the Middle Ages. Biography. Early life and rise to power. Boethius was born in Rome to a patrician family around 480 AD, but his exact birth date is unknown. His family, the Anici, included emperors Petronius Maximus and Olybrius and many consuls. His father, Manlius Boethius, who was appointed consul in 487, died while Boethius was young. Another patrician, Quintus Aurelius Memmius Symmachus, adopted and raised Boethius, instilling in him a love for literature and philosophy. Both Memmius Symmachus and Boethius were fluent in Greek, an increasingly rare skill at the time in the Western Empire. For this reason, some scholars believed that Boethius was educated in the East. According to John Moorhead, the traditional view is that Boethius studied in Athens based on Cassiodorus's rhetoric describing Boethius learning in one of his letters. But this appears to be a misreading, and his studying in Athens is more likely a legend. The French scholar Pierre Kersel has argued that Boethius studied at Alexandria with the Neoplatonist philosopher Ammonius Hermia. However, Moorhead observes that the evidence supporting Boethius having studied in Alexandria is not as strong as it may appear, and observes that Boethius may have been able to acquire his formidable learning without traveling. On account of his erudition, Boethius entered the service of Theodoric the Great at a young age and was already a senator by the age of 25. His earliest documented acts on behalf of the Ostrogothic ruler were to investigate allegations that the paymaster of Theodoric's bodyguards had debased the coins of their pay, to produce a water clock for Theodoric to give to King Gundobad of the Burgunds, and to recruit a lyre player to perform for Clovis, king of the Franks. Boethius married his foster father's daughter, Rusticana. Their children included 2 boys, Symmachus and Boethius. During Theodoric's reign, Boethius held many important offices, including the consulship in the year 510. But Boethius confesses in his De Consolatione Philosophia that his greatest achievement was to have both his sons made co-consuls for the same year, one representing the East and the other the West, and finding himself sitting between the 2 consuls, and as if it were a military triumph, letting his largesse fulfill the wildest expectations of the people packed in their seats around him. In 522, the same year his 2 sons were appointed joint consuls, Boethius accepted the appointment to the position of Magister Officiorum, the head of all the government and court services. Fall and death. In 520, Boethius was working to revitalize the relationship between the Roman See and the Constantinoplean See, though still both a part of the same church. Disagreements had begun to emerge between them. This may have set in place a course of events that would lead to loss of royal favor. 500 years later, this continuing disagreement led to the East-West Schism in 1054, in which communion between the Catholic Church and Eastern Orthodox Church was broken. In 523, Boethius fell from power, after a period of imprisonment in Pavia for what was deemed a treasonable offense. He was executed in 524. The primary sources are in general agreement over the facts of what happened. At a meeting of the Royal Council in Verona, the referendarius Cyprianus accused the ex-consul Caecina Decius Faustus Albinus of treasonous correspondence with Justin I. Boethius leapt to his defense, crying, "The charge of Cyprianus is false, but if Albinus did that, so also have I and the whole Senate with one accord done it. It is false. My lord King Cyprianus then also accused Boethius of the same crime, and produced 3 men who claimed they had witnessed the crime. Boethius and Basilius were arrested. First the pair were detained in the baptistry of a church, then Boethius was exiled to the Ager Calventinus, a distant country estate, where he was put to death. Not long afterwards Theodoric had Boethius, a father-in-law Symmachus, put to death, according to Procopius, on the grounds that he and Boethius together were planning a revolution, and confiscated their property. The basic facts in the case are not in dispute, writes Geoffrey Richards. What is disputed about this sequence of events is the interpretation that should be put on them. Boethius claims his crime was seeking the safety of the Senate. He describes the 3 witnesses against him as dishonorable. Basilius had been dismissed from royal service for his debts, while Venantius Opilio and Gaudentius had been exiled for fraud. However, other sources depict these men in far more positive light. For example, Cassiodorus describes Cyprianus and Opilio as utterly scrupulous, just and loyal, and mentions they are brothers and grandsons of the consul Opilio. Theodoric was feeling threatened by international events. The Acacian schism had been resolved, and the Nicene Christian aristocrats of his kingdom were seeking to renew their ties with Constantinople. The Catholic Hilderic had become king of the Vandals and had put Theodoric's sister Amalafrida to death, and Arians in the east were being persecuted. Then there was the matter that with his previous ties to Theodahad, Boethius apparently found himself on the wrong side in the succession dispute following the untimely death of Eutharic, Theodoric's announced heir. The method of Boethius or execution varies in the sources. Perhaps he was killed with an axe or a sword, or, possibly, he was clubbed to death. According to another version, a rope was attached round his head and tightened till his eyes bulged out, then his skull was cracked. In any case, his remains were entombed in the church of San Pietro in Cieldoro in Pavia, also the resting place of Augustine of Hippo. In Dante's The Divine Comedy, Paradise, Canto X, lines 121–29, the spirit of Boethius is pointed out by St. Thomas Aquinas. Now if thy mental eye conducted be from light to light, as I resound their frame, the 8th, well worth attention thou wilt see. The soul who pointed out the world's dark ways, to all who listen, its deceits unfolding. Beneath in Cieldoro lies the frame whence it was driven, from woe and exile, to this fair abode of peace and bliss it came. Past classical and medieval historians have had a hard time accepting a sincere Christian who was also a serious Hellenist. Arnaldo Momigliano argues that many people have turned to Christianity for consolation. Boethius turned to paganism. His Christianity collapsed. It collapsed so thoroughly that perhaps he did not even notice its disappearance. However, this view does not reflect the majority of current scholarship on the matter. The community that he was part of valued both classical culture and Christian belief.